Ah. Okay, good afternoon, Avian Science class. I hope everybody's doing well today. So you guys aren't as into the coloring as my students were last spring. I'll see if I can come up with some more find that lizard kind of things. All right. Okay, I told you this was going to happen. I am changing the schedule for the assignments. The assignments that were originally due on January 29th will be reopened about 5 minutes after class ends, and they will be due next Wednesday. So if you did it, you found questions you couldn't answer, you can go back and complete those assignments. And the assignments that were originally due this coming Sunday will now be due the following Sunday. from now on, except for these two assignments right here, new assignments are going to be posted on Fridays. So the next new assignment will be posted on February 10th, and they will be due the following Friday. I hope that works out a little bit better, because I know there was some confusion.
Sorry, can you, my volume wasn't up all the way. I heard the new assignments thing, but before that, I didn't catch anything.
Yeah, so the assignments that were originally due last Sunday on the 29th are going to be due next Wednesday. The assignments that were originally due on the 5th are now due on the 12th. So those two dates are not, they're different, right? Instead of having
so one that for this Saturday's moved forward.
Okay. So the one that was due this Sunday is moved back a week, yes. And then everything will be due on Fridays. So I will write the assignments on a Friday, and they will cover the material that we've already talked about in class. And you will have, again, a week to finish those. So if the dates are confusing, I'll put those in an announcement on Blackboard so you can double check. Okay. So you guys asked me some questions last time that I couldn't answer, or there was some confusion about. So I did some research. The image is blocking some of the text. Okay. Just shrinking it down. There we go. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, how long does it take to regrow feathers? Well, I was able to find flight feather regrowth periods, which generally takes 1 to 2 months. Less time for smaller birds. I know that's a shorter time period for contour feathers, but I wasn't able to find any good time ranges. So that's the best information I can give you about how long it takes to regrow feathers.
And that's for all of them. That's not like for each individual feather.
That is an excellent question, and I believe that you are correct. Yes. The most up-to-date information on bleeding in birds and stopping bleeding in birds. So we had a big discussion, and I was like, silver nitrate's toxic, and other people were like, but it's in quick stop. Well, I went to my avian veterinary sites and found that the advice has been updated in the past couple of years. They recommend applying pressure with or without the use of flour or cornstarch. They are not recommending quick stop for birds at this point. So that's something called styptic powder, and it can be toxic if swallowed. So it's, if you're stopping the bleeding on a cut toenail or a blood feather, if the bird doesn't get the styptic powder in its mouth, it's not a problem. Same thing, and there are 2 ingredients that are in blood stopping products that can be problems. Silver nitrate can be toxic if it gets in a bird's mouth. And in the quick stop, if it doesn't have silver nitrate, it might have potassium aluminum sulfate, and potassium aluminum sulfate is also toxic to birds. So now we're stepping back. The advice is going to be flour or cornstarch. And the other thing you guys were getting me on was horns and antlers. So horns can have a core of bone, but it is covered with keratin. So horns largely made of keratin. Antlers are shed yearly and then regrown. They're made of bone, fibrous tissue with a covering of skin. The skin gets shed when the antlers are fully grown. But I want to point out that biology doesn't always put things in our nice little categories. So when we talk about rhino hairs, I have experience with rhinos. I went to South Africa a few years ago and volunteered with a rhino group that does dehorning. So I know that there's no bone in there because I've, seen them cut the horn off. So they're just keratin, they're just hair. And if we talk about narwhals, their horns are teeth. So this is a rhino skull. You can see there's a little bit of a bump here to help support the horn. The horn would actually be coming up from this flat part, but there's no horn sticking up. Yes, everybody's answering the question about why we have to do this. And we have to do this because they are being killed for their horns, which is so frustrating because their horns can be cut off and regrown. If we were ranching rhinos, we could supply the antler horn that some people seem to think is a medicine, which, it's basically the same stuff as your hair. So yeah, that's one of my big soapboxes. Same thing with ivory. They kill elephants for their tusks. Their tusks regrow. You can trim the tusks and they regrow. Kinley, go ahead and raise your hand. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I still think that one, it's illegal for you to cut off elephants' tusks, so people should not do that. It should be also not so good for people to cut off rhinos' horns. I think both of them should be illegal. But it doesn't make sense. You would think that it would hurt them.
It doesn't. The rhino's horns, the study that I was working on was actually looking at rhinos in two communities near each other. One community was dehorned annually. The other one was not dehorned. We looked at stress hormone levels in their feces, and we saw no difference. When I say we, I was the one collecting the rhino feces. It would be nice if the poachers would quit poaching them. But unfortunately, in order to save their lives, we have to, at this point, dehorn rhinos. I don't think anybody's doing detusking on elephants, but we are seeing that in places with a lot of poaching pressure, the females in African elephants, the females usually don't have tusks, or usually do have tusks, but in areas with a lot of poaching, we're seeing that they're evolving not to have them because the poachers are taking out so many of the females with tusks that the ones that don't have tusks are the ones who are surviving and reproducing. They've tried tattooing horns and putting dyes and poisons and stuff in the horns. It has had no effect on the rate of poaching. Dehorning does have an effect on the rate of poaching. They definitely poach more in areas where the rhinos have larger horns. The problem is, we talk about dyeing and putting poisons in there, but the people who are poaching the horns are basically very poor. They're not well paid for the horns, but it's kind of like drug deals. The big boss who coordinates everything makes all the money, and they're making millions or billions of dollars a year. What would happen if a dehorned rhino were challenged by a horned rhino? Rhinos, when they're challenging each other,
Isn't that like a mating, fighting for a mate or something?
that would be competing for mates and territory. But they usually just do pushy, shovey stuff. So it's not a certain death. I think the one with the horn would have an advantage if they were size matched. But yeah, no, they don't usually use their horns on each other. We think they use their horns against lions, so that isn't an issue. But mostly what they use horns for is marking their territory. They rub the horns on surfaces and like scrape the bark off of trees and that kind of stuff. As far as we can tell, that's the primary function of horns in rhinos. It's not very clear. We haven't actually seen a lot of proof of what they're using their horns for. So it's kind of a, there's got to be a reason for it. We're just not sure what it is. Okay. This is not a class on rhinos, even though it's one of my soapboxes, because, I love them. I love rhinos. I love elephants. I've worked with both species before.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say my cousin was just in India and literally people like riding elephants, and it's just crazy because like it was like,
Yeah.
why would they want to hurt this animal, this beautiful animal for tusks?
Well,
Like, why would they? I mean, obviously, if it has to be removed because of like its health. Like to just take a tusk off an elephant for no reason, it's just totally not okay. It's part of their nature.
I'm right there with you. I don't think we should be doing that, but as long as there's a demand for ivory, there's going to be people removing or partially removing tusks off of elephants and selling them for ivory. I mean, that's better than killing them for their tusks.
But I feel like it could lead to more problems. Like, isn't it part of their like, like it taking a tusk, and that caused it to die faster than without it?
No, apparently it doesn't seem to. I know more about the rhino horn issue than the elephant tusk issue. They're both much more complicated than we realize. The issues are much more complicated than we realize, and it is beyond the scope of this class. So I'm going to cut this discussion short, even though it's a good discussion. Okay. So when we wrapped up, we were talking about molting. And why it happens, when it happens. And we wrapped up looking at this 6-week-old umbrella cockatoo. Baby birds, before they get their feathers, I mean, oh, they're just funny looking. They're just funny looking. These new feathers that are coming in that look like little spikes coming through the skin here, those are called pin feathers. And Yep, getting up for your 8 a.m. class. Yep. I've had students come to class looking a lot like this. Not always at 8 a.m. classes either. But these pin feathers, when they're coming in, can itch. Birds are often cranky when this is going on. Some birds like it when you scratch these pin feathers and get that sheath off a little bit. It's okay to do that on the body feathers, on the contour feathers, but you don't want to do that on the flight feathers. And of course, if the bird doesn't like it, just don't do it. So when we talk about molting, we've been talking about it to replace damaged feathers and for getting ready for migration, but they also do it seasonally. So these are both male bobolinks. Bobolinks can be seen in some places. They're field birds, and you can see them in some places in New England. And during the breeding season, the males are almost all black with this yellow cap on the head. Very striking birds. When it's not mating season, they're kind of sparrow colored, right? Not a very, well, I think they're very pretty, but they're not as striking and obvious looking as this guy. So the males want to be noticed during breeding season. And one way for males to be noticed and to attract females is to have some very obvious coloration. Cardinals, the males are red. They're easy to spot. Bobolinks, this black color, is easy to spot in a field. However, these bright colors or strongly contrasting colors makes them much easier to be spotted by predators. So to reduce that risk, a lot of them will molt after breeding season into these more drab colors. So they're not attracting predators. These are female bobolinks. This is a female bobolink in the breeding season. This is in the non-breeding season. You can see there's not really a difference. This one looks a little yellower, but that's just the lighting in the photograph. They're basically the same. Some birds don't have feathers in some places. This can be natural, as in the case of the vultures, where their head is mostly naked. Because if you're sticking your head in a rotting sheep's carcass, you don't want feathers on the part that's going in the carcass, because getting those feathers on the top of the head clean is challenging for a bird. And you don't want them, caked with things like blood and tissues that will grow bacteria and possibly give you an infection. Sometimes species are bred to look like these chickens with no feathers in certain places. Other species might have colored patches of skin that they can expose to attract mates. They can also, whoever sits on the nest after the eggs have hatched, when they still have to keep the babies warm, or when the eggs are in there and they have to keep the eggs warm. All birds that participate in that behavior lose feathers on their belly in an area that's called a brood patch. Let me type that on the screen for you. It's not in my notes. So a brood patch is an area with no feathers. It has a lot more blood vessels during the breeding season, and it's specifically to help keep eggs and babies warm. When it's not breeding season, the feathers grow back in and they don't have that bare area. Missing feathers can also be an abnormal condition. So you can see this guy, this little finch, is missing a lot of feathers on his face right here. And of course, this cockatoo has pulled feathers off of all of his belly and legs. This abnormal loss of feathers can be due to a couple of things. Kinley, go ahead.
I believe, well, is it kind of like the same thing as the disorder in humans where they pull out their own hair?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's like trichotillomania. It's hard to say, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Trichotillomania.
trick is something.
Trichotillomania, and then there's also dermatillomania.
Okay, thank you. It's exact in birds that are under extreme stress, they do pull out their own feathers. And it's this, you're right, it's exactly the same as people who pull out their hair under stress or cut themselves when they're under stress. It can be boredom, yes, Maddie. It can also be loneliness. It can be, you know, any kind of stress in the environment. When we talk about parrots, and in fact, most of the species that we keep, sorry, Maddie, we're going to be talking about self-harm for about 30 seconds. So if you want to mute, turn the sound off, go right ahead. Okay. So okay. This is parrots and most of the species of birds that we keep in captivity live in relatively large social groups in the wild. You will never see a cockatoo, a macaw, a parrot, a budgie, a cockatiel by themselves in the wild out of the ability to hear their friends and family and their mate, the other members of their flock. Being alone and separated from others of their own species is incredibly stressful for these birds. Okay, and I made a note to put a trigger warning on that next time I talk about this. Thank you for pointing that one out. Now, on to happier topics. Birds have to keep their feathers clean. Feathers are important for flight. They have to be maintained in a clean condition so that the birds can fly better. So the way this is done is called preening. Generally speaking, a bird will start preening an individual flight feather or a wing feather or tail feather. They'll start at the base and they'll work towards the tip. This helps fix places where the feathers have come apart slightly, where there's some damage, where those barbules have separated. So this is kind of the basic cleaning process of birds. Birds have this gland here. You had a house guest who hated the sound of preening tail and flight feathers. Huh.
Yeah, it makes that like really, really slight sort of like as they pull the feather through.
Mm-hmm.
My house guest couldn't handle it.
Well, I hope they don't ever buy a bird. one of the, we took in an 8-year-old cat a long time ago now. And the person who had her before could not stand the sound of the cat grooming herself. I'm like, did you know nothing about cats before you got her? Anyway, birds have this gland at the base of the tail. I know it's kind of awkward to figure out exactly where this is on this guy. But it's really at the base of the tail. And it's called the uropygial gland or the preen gland. And this produces an oil that helps to waterproof feathers. So they'll get some of the oil from the gland and then they'll preen their feathers, get some more oil, do some more preening to get that, spread that oil across their feathers so that they are waterproof. Most birds also like bathing. Most birds will bathe in water. They might do it in a puddle or in captivity in a small bowl. We see them a lot of times in our bird baths, taking baths. That's what they're there for. Anna, all birds have that gland. Yes, lots of birds love to be misted. I've seen birds take a bath using the dew on leaves first thing in the morning. I've got a little solar powered fountain in front of my office window, and I'll see the hummingbirds come in and they fly through the fountain part where the water's splashing up into the air. So they're getting exposed to water for cleaning. Usually wild birds don't get soaking wet, so they don't ever look quite as wet as this guy does here. But in captivity, they'll practically immerse themselves and get sopping wet. Some species do dust bathing, either in addition to bathing in water or instead of. So these are species that tend to live in drier habitats, and it's not as easy for them to find water supplies. Can bathing affect flying? If the bird gets sopping wet, it can. Yes, if they're too wet, it can. That's why I was mentioning most birds do light splashing rather than trying to get sopping wet. So you can see this ostrich. You can imagine that in dry areas of Africa, which is where most ostriches live, it's hard to find a big enough water supply to, take a bath. And their feathers are different than other birds, so I don't know how well they become waterproofed. So dust baths are used instead. This is a house sparrow or European sparrow. Don't let European fool you. They're a worldwide species at this point, and they will take either wet or dust baths, depending on the availability of water, and sometimes the temperature bothers them. Regardless, what they're trying to do in these situations is get dirts and oils off of their skin, maybe get some parasites off. We can also see birds doing this if they have a heavy parasite load or to prevent a heavy parasite load. They do two things that look like this, where they spread their feathers out. It's a very characteristic posture. It's called anting. And sometimes it actually does involve ants. And what they do is they sit like this and ants will crawl on the bird, and the ants are hunting parasites on the bird. So they're literally, yes, it's just ectoparasites, just literally pulling the parasites off. Sometimes there aren't any ants around, and we think that they are in this posture because ultraviolet radiation is doing something similar. It's making conditions unpleasant for the external parasites. We're pretty sure that's what's going on when there aren't ants around, but we do know it's related to parasites. Yeah, most water birds, their oils really do help prevent their feathers from getting soaked. But when we look at diving ducks, albatross, and gulls that go under the water, the way their feathers are laid out on their body also helps prevent water from getting underneath those feathers. And when we talk about getting soaking wet versus just splashing, what we're talking about is water getting under those contour feathers and into the downy layer. And that can be, that can make it difficult for the bird to fly. It can also chill birds. So if you're letting your bird bathe, or you're taking a shower with your bird, which some people do, you want to make sure that your house isn't too terribly cold when you do that. Okay, so what do we need to do for birds? We need to provide them with an opportunity to bathe. We need to keep an eye on them, obviously, and their feather condition, especially during molting. We want to be tolerant of their temper during molting because they do get irritable. And sometimes people clip birds' wings. Now, when we say clipping birds' wings, we are not cutting skin. We are not cutting blood vessels. We are cutting flight feathers. The idea behind this is that it makes it harder for the bird to fly. That's the idea behind it. It doesn't always. So some species, like small songbirds, the canaries and the finches, you should never clip their wings. They are birds that fly and are not adapted for walking or climbing. So if you clip their flight feathers, you're just making it very hard, if not impossible, for them to get onto a perch or to their food bowl or to their water bowl. This is anytime the flight feathers regrow. This is something that is not a one-time thing. So to clip a bird's feathers, you only clip the primary flight feathers. So not these closer to the body, only these towards the end. You can see this woman's just using a pair of scissors. That's fine. You want to make sure you avoid the skin and tissues of the wing. Just get the feathers. Make sure none of them are blood feathers. They will grow back. Now, different people have different opinions on how many feathers you should clip. And some people, and this next bit is controversial, some people believe in only clipping one wing. Now, if you only clip one wing, the bird is less able to fly than if you clip feathers on both wings. But they tend to spiral down and they're more likely to have a crash landing. You can clip different numbers of flight feathers on each wing to kind of try and balance the risk of being able to fly versus crashing. But many, many people feel that all birds should have the opportunity to fly. And if you have a big bird, like a parrot or a cockatoo, or a macaw, that means flying around your house. Even with clipped wings, some birds can fly. I had a friend who lost her pet conure, who had clipped flight feathers. She took it outside. It wasn't restrained. It wasn't in a cage. And up it went to the top of a pine tree. Never saw it again. So never, and I'm going to type this on the screen because this is such a never. Yeah, one little gust of wind and they are gone. Never take a bird outside without restraint or a cage. They do make harnesses for birds. Yes, Maddie, you got it right there. If you want to take your bird outside, put it in a harness.
Thoughts on free flight training and people who work with their birds to go do that?
I think that that is a risk. I think it's kind of like taking your dog off leash. If you've got a well-trained dog, most of the time it's okay, but every now and then something could startle your dog and it runs out into traffic. It's the same thing with the birds. They may be trained for free flight, but if something scares them, they're off. Plus, there's always the risk of hawks. Hawks will take them out of the air. Poor Betsy's having problems with her internet today. Okay. That's talking about feathers. We can also talk, the next thing we're going to talk about is beaks. When it comes to beaks, form follows function. The shape of the beak is related to what the bird eats. So this is a sunbird and it eats nectar. So this beak is long and it's curved so that it can get into flowers and get nectar. This guy's also got a long curved beak. This is a shorebird. It sticks its beak in the sand to catch small little things crawling in the sand. So same idea, different foods, but they're still sticking their beaks into a smaller area. This chunky short beak, that's a seed eater. Having this hook at the end of the beak, you see it here on this, it's probably supposed to be a eagle. This hook on the beak of the pelican, those are carnivores and fish eaters. And it's helpful for holding on to struggling prey and pulling off pieces of meat.
Wait, can you go back? What is D and what
Okay,
is that, a hook on top of the upper beak, or are they like side to side crossing?
they're side to side crossing. So the upper beak, the tip of it is closer to us than the bottom beak. The bird is called a crossbill. And they pry open pine cones. So having an unequal beak allows them to put pressure in two different directions on that pine cone to pry it open and get the seeds.
Are they always crossed in the same direction across the species?
90 some odd % of the time, yes. Yeah. It's primarily, those are primarily found further north. Sometimes you get You get them sometimes in the winter in New England, but usually they're further north. Okay, when we look at the parrot beak, I want you to notice how tall it is, how thick it is from top to bottom. The thicker a beak is, the stronger that beak is. This guy can open nuts. It can crack open, and not just like peanuts, which are pretty flimsy, but things like walnuts that are, we can't open without tools. What do you think this means if it bites you? It's doing a lot of damage to your finger. In parrots, they do have a hook, even though they're not meat eaters, because they use that hook to manipulate things. So they will hold objects and nuts and various things in one foot, and they'll use that hook on the beak to dig either insects out of a piece of wood or meat out of a nut or all kinds of things like that. The smaller parrots, this is a small parrot, it's a budgie. You can see it also has a very thick beak. It's also got that parrot hook here. They're not as strong as the big ones, obviously. Ooh, temporary nerve damage from a cockatoo bite. Ouch. Yeah, ooh, no fun there. So budgies can bite. It's unpleasant. They can cut your skin open, but they're not likely to cause nerve damage or break your finger. I mentioned seed eaters. Their beak's kind of short. It can vary how thick it is from top to bottom depending on the type of seeds they eat. But they all have kind of this short, stubby beak. Our meat and fish eaters, they do have a hook on the end, but their beaks are longer than they are tall. So they're still a pretty strong beak, not as strong as parrots, and they don't have that height that you tend to see in parrots. This is, as I've mentioned, helping with slippery food like meat and fish. These long, straight beaks are found in insect eaters, either to get insects out of the crevice, or in the case of this whippoorwill down at the bottom, this guy eats insects in flight. It looks like when its mouth is closed, it has a teeny tiny bill, but you can see how wide open that mouth is. That really helps it when it's catching insects on the wing, because they've got a big pocket to catch the insects in. And you can see those rictal bristles on the side. You can really see on this side how they're really just right in front of the eye to help protect the eye in case an insect gets around the beak. This is a hummingbird. Hummingbirds have a long, very thin beak. Sometimes they're curved. Sometimes they're longer than others. A lot of the tropical hummingbirds in Central and parts of South America will have their beak. They have lots of different sizes of beak so that they can specialize on different flowers. So there's less competition for certain flowers. In New England, you pretty much only have the ruby-throated hummingbird. So there's not a lot of variability in beak length because they're a more generalist length. So they can eat from lots of different types of flowers. And of course, flamingos have this very bizarre shaped beak. When you look at the side of the beak, I like this image because you can really see these grooves along the edge of the bill. You see those also in a lot of ducks. Do we have any hummingbirds where I am? Yes, we have. I have seen 4 different species of hummingbirds in my backyard coming to my feeder.
Wait, where are you?
Oh, I live in California. Hence Zoom class. Okay, so looking at these serrations on the side of the beak, the unusual shape of this beak is related to their unusual feeding behavior. You all know they turn their beak upside down, so this surface of the beak is on the bottom of the water supply. And they take in a mouthful of water, close their beak, use their tongue to push water out between these grooves, and that holds the kinds of things that they eat, like small insects and shrimp and tadpoles, small fish. It keeps all of that inside the beak. These are not gulls. No, the flamingo is not a gull species. I don't think I've shown you pictures of gulls. They're kind of there's a lot of variability in gull beaks. Oh, there's not a gull on here. They tend to be kind of straight, longer than our seed eaters, but gulls will take advantage of whatever they can get hold of. So they have kind of an in-between beak. It's not short like a seed eater. It's not thick like a parrot. It's not hooked like a fish eater. But they can eat fish. They can eat seeds. They don't usually, but they can. Mostly they eat things like small crustaceans, French fries. Okay, so a healthy beak. This is a healthy beak. It's relatively smooth on the surface. There's a few, you can see there's some minor cracking here. That's not too bad. It should be symmetrical, so the left side and the right side are the same. It's meeting the bottom beak. Yeah, he's got, it looks like it's going on the inside of his bottom beak. It is, but it's because he's eating something right now. No signs of peeling or major discoloration. This is a nice horn-colored beak with some dark areas. That's perfectly normal. The length is good. This is what we want to see on our pet birds. This is what we don't want to see. So somebody put in the chat something about braces on birds. I haven't ever heard of braces on birds, but I have heard of birds that have misaligned beaks. And usually this is kind of the result. This one's a very, very badly overgrown beak. Whoever their person is, they should really be ashamed of themselves. So in captivity, birds are not eating the same foods. They're not being exposed to the same materials that are important for them to maintain their beak in a healthy length and healthy alignment. Things like trauma, if a bird flies into something, they can damage their soft tissue or even their bones and cause their beaks not to line up correctly. They can have what we call developmental problems, which basically means they were born with something not lined up correctly. They can be given bad nutrition. And even things like liver disease can contribute to an overgrown or abnormal beak. This should definitely go to a vet. If the beak gets overgrown like this, the vet is going to have to work over multiple sessions doing some clipping and some filing to shorten and reshape the beak. So, I mean, you can see on this one, the edges are kind of uneven. It's not you know, this one, there's a straight line and then another straight line. That's pretty straight. A little bit of a curve there, which is also normal. This guy, here's a indentation. Here's another indentation. Here's a big bump. There is a blood supply in the beak. And if the beak gets overgrown, you've got to trim it back slowly so that the blood vessel will retreat and you don't cause a major blood loss. Are these cases covered under animal cruelty laws? This would be probably, well, this one's a pretty extreme example, but they can be covered under cruelty laws, negligence laws, sometimes cruelty laws. Birds are covered just like dogs and cats. Exactly where somebody draws the line, you know, that's largely up to animal control, whether they want to call it neglect or cruelty. And they'll probably make that decision based on whether it's a recurring situation or a one-off. Yeah, this one's an extreme case. So once you get a vet working on it and slowly bringing it back to the right length, getting it back into good condition, you can do routine trimming at home, just like you cut your dog's toenails, your cat's toenails. You can do that with the beak. But again, you've got to be careful not to hit that blood vessel. If you do, cornstarch, flour, direct pressure. The shape of the beak is critical for its function. You can imagine if somebody just decided to cut this straight across and it didn't have that nice curved hook on the end, the bird's going to have a hard time eating. So you've got to maintain the correct shape. Now, I have seen a bird that had a beak this badly overgrown. It was there was a gull. It was obviously in bad shape. It couldn't eat very well. We went out and caught it. Our vet worked on trimming the beak back. It took a couple of weeks. And because this was a wild animal and it was wildlife rehab, we released the bird. About 2 years later, the bird was back on the beach. And we caught it up and we trimmed its beak again and we let it go again. And that just goes to show, I mean, the birds can survive in the wild under some pretty challenging conditions. That one got very lucky that we found it not just once, but twice. Okay, feet. Just like the beak, form follows function. The shape of the feet, the length of the legs goes with the lifestyle of the bird. So this is a snowy egret. I can tell this is a snowy egret because they have black legs and golden slippers. So this is a wading bird. It's got relatively big feet. It stands on its feet most of the time. Bird legs are covered with scales. This picture here, that probably is a gull. You can see the scales on the front. It's good lighting to see those. And on the toes, even though it's not on the webbing, just like what you would see on a reptile. These scales are protective. They help prevent abrasions, scrapes, bruises and that kind of stuff. They have a little bit of an ability to maintain heat, but not much. Birds' feet can get a lot colder than the core of their body and still be fine. These are the bones of the leg. So this is the pelvis. I'm not going to ask you for the names of the pelvis, but this is the pelvis. Unlike lizards, unlike most mammals, the tail on a bird is relatively short. There are bones there. They're pretty much encased in the body, in the mass of the body. And there's this fused collection of bones at the end called the pygostyle, which is used for the attachment of muscles that allow the bird to move its tail around. Just like mammals, birds have a femur. They have a fibula. The other bone, instead of a tibia, is called a tibiotarsus. When birds are very early embryos, we can see that we can see separate bones where the tibiotarsus is going to be. So we can see a bone that's like our tibia, and there are some foot bones. And as the bird develops in the egg, those bones fuse together to form the tibiotarsus. Birds have an ankle. They have a tarso-metatarsus. So that's some of the other bones of the feet that have fused together. And they have 4 digits. So what words am I going to ask you to know? Femur, fibula, tibiotarsus, ankle, knee, digits, and tarso-metatarsus, and pygostyle. So those are the only words that I'm going to ask you about. I know that's, most of them, but I'm not doing a couple of these. Okay. When we look at a bird, I love this image. These are barn owls. This is a barn owl, full taxidermy mount, all the feathers. This is one where the feathers have been predominantly removed. So some of them have been cut. The flight feathers have been cut, and the rest of them have been plucked. And then this is a skeleton. So I want you to notice can you do your project on owls? Yes, you can. You need to let me know that you want to do it and be the first one in the gate. So this joint this joint, that's the knee. I should not try and write with my mouse. So this is the knee. That's not the hip joint. The hip joint is right there. So you can see this is actually the femur. So it's hidden. You know what? Wow, I am losing it today, aren't I? Okay. Yes, you're right. The blue is the ankle. Ugh. You guys need to, quit putting stuff in the chat and talk instead so that I'm not talking the whole time. This is the knee. Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. Anna, I am going to give you, for pointing out that mistake of mine, I'm going to give you an extra point on the next quiz. All right. So in red here is the knee. And let's see, let's get another color. That's the hip. Well, not quite. Hang on. That's the hip right there. So yes, we're not seeing the knee of the bird. It's actually tucked up inside the body wall. So even if you were to peek up underneath this wing on this plucked bird, the knee is it's wrapped in the same skin as the rest of the torso and abdomen. And this is another image to kind of show you the same idea. On this skeleton, we can see there's a lot more of the bird here. This is the keel. This is their equivalent of the breastbone. When we start talking internal anatomy, we'll talk about that. But it is inside the body wall. So the leg basically starts coming out of the body wall somewhere around here. Yes, this little skeleton looks very weird. This is trying to get, trying to show you a human skeleton in the same position as the bird skeleton. Our bodies don't quite move or don't quite work the same way. So it's not always, yeah, it doesn't look right. Oof. We will be mentioning the keel and how to score it. Absolutely. So here's a living bird. This is another long-legged wader. We can see the tibiotarsus, the ankle, the tarsometatarsus, and the digits of the foot. Okay, since I am apparently totally, I've been talking, I have a lecture right in front of this one, and after 3 hours of running my mouth, my brain starts pouring out of my ears. So I think we're going to stop there for today. Does anybody have any questions? Looks like no. Okay. In that case, everybody have a good weekend, and I will talk to you next week. I will respond to you this afternoon, Maddie. I'm making a note right now.